All right, so it says you are live, and I'm here. I'm Kimberly Hunt with Revision Division. Thank you all for who's joining today. Please say hi and put comments. Ask your questions in the comments. We'll get to those. But who's excited? We're giving you a chance today to win a signed printed edition of An Exhaustive Proof of Love. Thanks to our fabulous author, Josie Juniper. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's
Sure.
exciting and a little terrifying to be here.
It is for both of us, but it's super fun. And that's the thing. I do want to start us off with a warning that we are discussing a steamy romance novel. And so maybe the content is not suitable for children. I'm going to start us off with a quote that I thought sets the tone fairly well. So let me just get rid of the annoying banner first, since it's not coming up. We are here. We're ready to go. So this was one of my favorite quotes. And you'll have to forgive me because I probably have like a dozen favorite quotes. But this one, I think, sets our interview up just perfectly. Please recall that I told you to eat a bag of dicks this morning. Tact isn't exactly my middle name. So there you have it. It's apologies in advance if there are missteps on my part, spoilers, language resulting from my excitement. We're here to have fun. So relax, send the kids off to the outside, get some fresh air.
Yeah. Yep.
So I felt all the feels when I was reading your novel. I loved An Exhaustive Proof of Love. I desperately wanted it to be a book club book, though, because I wanted to pester someone else besides you with all my questions and the play-by-play of my reactions as I was reading. So that's why I reached out and said, hey, can we please do this interview?
Excellent. Yeah.
So let's find out more about Josie, about writing and editing, and we'll hear as we go through the interview. I might interrupt us here and there to take questions from others besides me. But if we're quiet and shy out on the comments, then I've got more than enough questions to go around.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay, so I read at the very end of your book, I think the author's note, you had mentioned that you had a variety of careers. And I'm curious how this may have influenced this broad work experience of, say, journalist and math tutor and author have influenced your writing. And I don't want you to leave out any of the scandalous bits.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I was a little cheeky with my bio in saying, really wholesome jobs, really scandalous jobs. And, as far as that range goes, really wholesome jobs working in as a math teacher, like a classroom math teacher with, like neurodivergent students. And then on the other end of the spectrum, in the 90s, I worked in a porn store for 18 months, which was kind of an adventure. I started that job because I was doing some research for an article because I was a journalist then. And I thought, this will be kooky, scandalous thing to say, and then I just ended up kind of staying for and it was a different world in the 90s. It was back when everything was still VHS tapes. And so, yeah. Lots of nervous bridal parties coming in, like bridal shower girls coming in, going tee-hee over all of the things in the shop. And it was a very fun job. It really was. And so.
I think at 16, I worked in our local video store where it was VHS. And it was a family store, but they had like a curtained off area and people would come and ask to see the binder and flip through. And I'm like a 16-year-old and I'm like, take it somewhere else. They're sitting there looking at the binder right in front of me. I'm like, okay.
Yeah. It's weird because, hopefully nobody said this to you as a 16-year-old, but like we definitely as clerks got a lot of guys who would come in pretending that they were buying something for somebody. And then they'd say, but what's your favorite one?
Yeah.
There's a lot of that kind of
I recommend
shit. So
for sure. So that segues nicely into this idea that, much like Edith, I have a grump tendency, and I tend to think the world is full of garbage monsters also,
Yeah.
unless I balance that out and by finding the positive, and
Yeah.
which is why I'm so passionate about volunteering. So I wanted to ask you, Josie,
Excellent.
how you're making the world a better place.
Well, I work as a remote math tutor now.
Mhm.
Used to be a classroom teacher. Now I just do tutoring, just like Edith. And one of the things that I feel like I'm really doing something to help the world is in teaching kids critical thinking,
Mm.
teaching them to understand things like statistics, so that they can sort of evaluate the data that there is so much of now in the world, and make good decisions. And also, I think most importantly, I work a lot on math anxiety and teaching kids to really embrace mistakes and see errors as super useful information and not like a failure, but that like all that deductive reasoning, like now we know what it isn't, and so we're moving closer to figuring out what is the answer. And I'm always excited when I work with kids and they say that they were super freaked out by something and now they feel so much better.
Yeah.
So yeah, hopefully I'm helping in that way.
It has to be. It's fantastic because I've seen that firsthand with I have small children, and
Mhm.
I've seen the deer in the headlights look where they're afraid to say the wrong answer, or they're just put on the spot and don't want to, kind of work through. And
Mhm.
so it's been fantastic to see some of the people who have worked with my kids and pulled them out of their shell and said, it's okay to have the wrong answer. Then we know, we're one
Yeah,
step closer.
definitely. Exactly. Yeah.
That's awesome. So you mentioned like that the math tutor part and the love of math, you have in common with Edith, and
Yes.
I totally related hard to her obsession with bread products. But I want to know what else, what other parts of you do you put into your books and your characters?
Um, well, I think that a lot of myself goes into all of my characters, both the the male and the female characters, and
Mhm.
in some of my books, even more so with the male characters. I identify more strongly, like with my last book, where I identified way more strongly with the male character, the one before this one. Um, and definitely people who know me will, when they read my stuff, will say, "Oh, I caught that, they saw that little thing where you put in that thing that happened that time, or that thing that somebody said that time, or
Mhm.
little things that are my own quirks or idiosyncrasies or fears, or things that I love." So, there are a lot of like personal Easter eggs, I guess, like life Easter eggs, because
Yeah.
I I don't feel like I could write things accurately if I wasn't able to identify on some level, even with the shittiest people.
Yeah.
Not necessarily that I'm like them, but I have to have had an experience like with that person. It's all kind of modeled on little bits and pieces of people that I know, or myself.
It has to make it much more authentic. Like it
Yeah,
resonates. It's
thank you.
awesome.
Yeah.
So that was this could be totally me, but am I alone in this observation that possibly Edith and Lawson have a little bit of a British accent or word choices here and there? Like where is
Um,
it coming from?
You are not the first person to have noticed that. I have had several people mention that, and I think it comes back to putting a lot of myself in my writing. In that, um, I grew up in a really Anglophile kind of household, and with like English roots on my mom's side, and um, I from childhood have kind of had this weird um, mashup of that. Had somebody once to say that I sound like an extra on a BBC miniseries minus the accent, because if I'm tense, either good or bad, I tend to get really formal. Somebody once said, "Oh, you can tell when you're pissed off when you say most assuredly." Like as soon as you bust out a most assuredly, like we know what's going on. So, and like the way that I pronounce 20, like both of the T's in 20, people would be like, "What is that?" Um, but yeah, and then other times I'm very slangy, so it kind of goes back and forth, and I think I choose that voice a lot when I'm writing.
Mm,
And also there are just a lot of more British terms that, because I like using them myself, I have my characters use them. Like I would definitely, like thinking of the part where Lawson says, and before you think I'm too posh, like
Yeah.
I just couldn't imagine having him say, I don't want you to think I'm too fancy. Like that just didn't sound like what he would say. So I'm like, oh no, he would definitely say posh because he's trying to sound posh.
Yeah.
So I think it has to do with a little bit of arrogance too, that I throw it in there, that both of them are a little high strung and defensive and trying to sound smarter than the other person because there is war between them. So
that is a perfect segue. That's exactly what I wanted to ask you next. I'm totally leading up to this. Like I know the answer because it's my favorite too. But tell me about some of your favorite offers and your favorite tropes.
Okay. So as far as romance authors, I am a huge, huge fan of Alexis Hall. I will read anything by Alexis Hall. Christina Lauren, I like, K.A. Tucker, Allie Hazelwood, of course, and I'm borderline obsessed with Alison Cochran's The Charm Offensive. Is flawless. I want to just assign everybody in the world a copy of that book. So those are my favorites. And as far as tropes, I think just my number one trope is enemies to lovers. I'm so attached to it because of the high degree of tension, for one thing, but also I really, in a way, the enemies to lovers arc feels to me kind of like the scientific method, which is that you start out with a certain kind of, you've got this information and you're like, this is my conclusion. And then as more information comes in, which, in a romance novel is you see their soft side, you see them doing something a little nice instead of shitty. And you go, oh, maybe I misjudged this person. And so slowly in enemies to lovers, they warm up to each other and they change their opinion. And to me, that feels like the scientific method, like, okay, we thought it was this, and now we have new information, and now we're going to change that. And so you get to watch it evolve. So, which is always exciting for me.
I love it. I just love I love the witty banter, the back and forth, the barbs in the beginning, the sexual tension and flirtation. Like it's one of my favorites, the enemies to lovers.
Yeah, me too.
So let's talk about your writing method and how you make that, how you bring that angst and the witty banter and the sexual tension out. Like what are your, I don't know, it's favorite time to write, or do you outline, like, what's your method to this like magical madness?
Oh, well, yeah, I carry angst with me everywhere I go. I was an 80s goth, so everything is going to be angsty. I'm like, it's a rom-com, except there's lots of super depressing parts and lots of really deep stuff because I can't not do that. But as far as the writing itself, I'm a super morning person. I do my best thinking before noon. I love to be awake before it gets light. I love getting up when it's still dark. I feel like the world is just mine because it's still dark. And so I wake up and I do most of my best writing in the morning. I'm absolutely useless after about 4 or 5 in the afternoon. And, my office is my sofa. I have my little spot. And yeah, I'm not a super, like in the planner versus pantser thing, I'm not a super planner where, I've got like character sketches all written out. I used to actually love that stuff, but I don't do it so much anymore. I always have an idea of the skeleton of how the story goes. And then I just kind of sit back and watch what the characters do. And I just transcribe. I let them take care of the details. A lot of stuff comes up like while I'm exercising or doing other kind of mindless tasks. I make a lot of notes in my phone of I hear snippets of dialogue or like little details of things that I want to put into a room or a scene. And so I make a lot of notes. I only really make a proper outline if I'm like stuck, where I'm like, well, shit, how I'm supposed to get over here. And now they've dragged me over here. How do I get back over there? So sometimes, but not very often, am I super organized.
I'm always amazed because I will see, foreshadowing or perfect little things that it had to go this way. And I'm always in awe of the authors that either in the beginning outline it all and have a story and then sit down and write, or even more so the ones that will write a scene as it comes to them. And that scene might be like the middle of the book. Like it's not in sequential order. And so I'm just when I get to the moments like when Edith and Lawson are in the bar, and I almost skipped over it where he pulls the hair tie. And then later it's a callback that I was like, genius. I love it.
And they always surprise me on that, because like I wish that I could say I'm all super clever and like, ooh, and I'm gonna have this, this object is gonna be significant later and I'm gonna bring it around. It literally surprises me too, because sometimes it's like I used to say, back when phones would ring and you didn't know who was on the other end, I would say, oh, sometimes I'm writing and I write that a phone rings and I don't know who's on the other end until I write that they pick it up. The same kind of thing happens now. Sometimes I'll be like writing and I'm like, of course you've got the hair tie. Of course you do, and I didn't plan it at all. I'm just like, yeah, that's just how it is. So I don't know, not to be too like magical or spooky about it or anything, but yeah, I just follow what they're telling me.
You make it sound so easy. And I know writing is hard. I know editing is exhausting. And that marketing is a little bit mystifying. But what has been your most rewarding experience as an author so far?
So, so I would say becoming a part of the community has been really interesting, especially because the landscape has changed so much with like social media and stuff. I'm a member of TIRA, which is the Independent Romance Authors Association, and the people there are fantastic. I've met so many just incredibly nice and helpful people. And then also the community on Instagram has been kind of amazing. I was terrified of the idea of having to do Instagram at first. I was just so angry every time I had to open it. I was like, why are you making me do this, world? And now I'm like, oh no, everybody's so nice. Like even the people when they're not being nice are still kind of nice about it. It's just, it's very welcoming. So that has been fun. It's made me kind of get out of my shell a little bit.
And I think, sorry to interrupt you, but I think we had something in common. You mentioned that you, maybe you don't anymore, but at one point you were on Critique Match too, right? Oh, this was probably when we get to editing. I was going to ask that.
Yeah. And I still am. I still use it. And I have made such wonderful friends there. I like, shout out to Carmen, shout out to Lisa. Like I have such wonderful people that I know on there who have been so helpful and supportive.
That's one of my volunteer spots. So I started out years ago, just, I'm like, oh, I'm an editor. It's great practice. Let me do some like beta reading or, proofreading for people, whatever they need. And I loved being able to quick turn something back around, and then people would come back to me and bring me a new version. I'm like, oh, look, I get to see, like a lot of times I'll do 1 or 2 passes on a manuscript. And then until it's actually printed and delivered to my mailbox, I don't get to see what changes were accepted or what ideas inspired something new and how the story took off from there. So it was a very exciting and rewarding experience to be part of.
I totally agree. Like, and I've had people, friends, critique partners on there be like, oh, I'm sorry to have to send this to you again, but can you take another look at it? Because I made these changes. And I'm like, no, I love that. Like as a math nerd, I love watching the thing evolve as like you change one thing at a time. And so I love reading. I'll read it as many times as necessary. I love it every time.
Cool. Yeah. So how long did it take you to write an exhaustive proof of love?
Altogether from start to finish was 4 months.
That's so short.
To me, it felt like forever because I actually had an injury along the way where I broke my hand and I couldn't type for several weeks. And so I was like, so it felt like it took way too long for me. But the initial writing was 2.5 months. And then the editing was like 6 weeks. But before people think that I'm too just massively disciplined or something, I don't have a lot of, most people are doing this with an outside job where they're squeezing it in on the weekends and in the evening when they're tired and they have so much else to do. And I don't have, I can seriously write for 12 or 14 hours in a day if I feel like it. I'll occasionally have a little tutoring session and have to pop off for like an hour or something to go talk to a kid about algebra and then come back. But I have a lot of time, which is why that's what made that possible for me.
That's awesome. So did you, you said that you it felt like longer. Did you expect it to take that long, or did you feel like Edith when Gigi whispers, "Are you sure you're actually good at this?" And to be clear, I'm just asking about imposter syndrome. I totally think that you're
yes.
good at this.
Yeah. No, definitely. Yeah, that does definitely come up. I mean, I think there was a time where seeing how prolific some indie authors are, I was like, oh man, I'm going to be a fucking machine. I'm going to be amazing. Like I'm going to bang out a full manuscript every 6 weeks, a chapter a day every day. And I'm going to do 6 books a year. And then at a certain point, I was like, I really shouldn't do that. I shouldn't do that to myself or the world. So I made myself slow down a little bit. And yeah.
I mean, it shows by the quality of what you've put out. So don't mess with it.
Yeah, this one definitely took a while. It was a lot of full front to back edits.
So tell me, when we were talking before about how you get that angst and the sexual tension, and I am just blown away by how Edith and Lawson are scorching on the page together. Like, I have so many examples that I want to share with you, but tell me, how do you make this happen?
I mean, again, it's kind of like what I was saying before, that I don't really write it. I just kind of let them do what they're doing, and I just sort of type it. I just transcribe it as quickly as possible. Their conversations are super organic. I mean, I typically know what kind of information has to be exchanged in the course of a conversation, but how they say it, I have no idea. Aside from that, sometimes in my notes program, I will have thought of some funny thing that somebody might say, and I'll be like, oh, got to throw that in there somewhere. But with the sex scenes, with the conversations, I just watch what they did naturally, and I overwrite, I think, and then I pare it down, because I do really have a tendency to be wordy. So I end up cutting it down quite a bit, but I start with just throwing everything at the wall, just typing everything that I'm seeing.
Well, good for you for recognizing the gems, and because it didn't seem anything but concise to me. Like, every word counted, it mattered. There's reading through it, there was never a point where I was tempted to skim.
Good. That is high praise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I love when, like, some of those examples I was talking about when they're scorching together, like, I mean, the first chapter is just amazing, but where she meets back up with him and asks, and I'm sorry if I'm trying not to give spoilers, but I want to share, like, the love. But when she, like, asks to lie down and they start talking about gathering empirical evidence, I was just, it's adorable. It's so good.
Yeah. The at least intro to the sex scenes is in some places, or the intro to the kisses has been tremendously nerdy in some places. I've got one place where I've got that the Pythagorean theorem must be used before they can figure out exactly where to stand to kiss, because otherwise it's really going to be upsetting to Edith. And yeah, so fortunately she can do it all mentally. So nobody had to bust out a pencil and paper to do that. So.
Well, I'd love to share another of my favorite quotes, and then that'll lead us into talking about consent.
Okay.
So this was a good one. I just adore it. Stop being all sensitive, like I'm a baby deer that's going to bolt into the forest. Ravish me a little. Nicely. You know what I mean, right? My safe word is seriously, knock it the fuck off. So I was in the car outside of karate, and my kid was still in the car, one of them, and he's laughing as I'm laughing out loud. And he's like, "What is wrong with you?" He's like, "Why are you highlighting that book?" I'm like, "It's great."
Yes.
How do you take those like, make consent sexy without taking the reader out of the scene, out of the moment?
Right. Well, I thought a lot about this over, I've been a romance reader since, since my teens, and, which was in the 80s, because I'm 7,000 years old. And definitely the early, like, bodice ripper era stuff was very not super consenty. And I'm not so much talking about, like, the original Flame and the Flower one with all of the rape and all of that stuff. But I think there was still kind of culturally clinging to this women being reticent or nervous about admitting that they want sex.
Yeah.
And so it was a little bit like, having somebody talk you into that last slice of cake or something, or, you know, needing for the male characters to either be, you know, super commandy and coercive, you know, just blatantly coercive, or at the very least, really, really compellingly seducing a woman so that she could say, oh, all right, I'm going to beat my tiny fists against your chest first and then say, oh, all right. And it's changed so much. It's changed so much that now I think women are okay with admitting that they want sex. And so now that we have heroines who are able to say, like, I want this, they're like full participants in the sex. And so I think it makes it easier to write consent because women are engaging in this whole thing. It's not like everybody sits down and we're going to have a conversation, write out a contract or anything. It just happens really organically because women are talking about sex. They're saying what they're saying, do this, don't do that. My safe word is, you know, knock it the fuck off.
Right.
Pay attention, read the fucking room, you know? So I think that it's definitely changed the tone of romance novels. Contemporary romance novels especially, I think, are really good with showing consent without having it interrupt the moment or be a mood kill.
Yeah. So. Very good. Yeah, there are so many tiny but impactful details that you use to bring your characters to life. One of the ones I was thinking of that really stood out to me was when Lawson observes the pen dent in her finger. And I'm like, oh my God, that's just like love. Like that, to notice something like that and to like be a collector of all these little details where it was just, it just highlighted for me the way that you bring the characters to life. Like that to me, it was a little bit of an eye opener, like, oh, that's how she does it.
Yeah. I feel like, with, you know, that's such a thing with falling in love, is that you start to fall in love with all of those weird little details, of, you know, just specific tiny things, noises that people make and things that they do. And what, you know, whether or not they have a little dent on their forefinger from how they hold their pencils. You know, do you know Laurie Anderson, the musician at all? She had a song where she was singing about kind of like a breakup or falling out of love. And she sings, I no longer love your sweaters. I no longer love the way you hold your pens and pencils. And I was like, that I heard that when I was a teenager and I was like, oh, I get it, because you love those things so much, those tiny, completely mundane things when you are falling for somebody, and then they just become mundane again when you don't have those feelings. So yeah, I like bringing in all of those little details.
Yeah, very good. So one of the, sorry, this probably is like totally fangirling rather than asking you questions for some of these, but showing like that was, you know, showing how they're falling in love and noticing those things. You also very adeptly show feeling. So as an editor, I see so many manuscripts come across my desk that I have to do like I feel cliched saying this is like you're telling me what you want the reader to feel rather than showing me, but you do it really well. And there was this one part where you talk about how everything in her posture conveyed the embarrassment of a child who calls out to the wrong mother in a crowd. And it was just that feeling immediately. I immediately recognized, if not that I've called out to someone in a crowd, or I've said, I love you to a teacher or called a teacher mom, you know, like that was just a very good explanation to put the reader in the moment and feel what he was noticing. Thank you. Great. Rather than saying he noticed she was embarrassed.
Yeah. I like, you know, having those, describing things often in terms of something else that has a similar vibe to it. And sometimes I overdo that. Like I write a ton of like what my mom calls batshit metaphors, where sometimes I just put in stuff and, you know, she's my first line of, you know, she reads my stuff first and she'll just be like, no, she's like, this is terrible. She's like, this is completely, she's a really, really good critic, because she's very helpful in that way. So I do write a lot of those things, comparing things to other things. And then I go back and remove about half of them when I realize it was something that was only clever to me. I'm always trying to show restraint, but yeah.
So can I switch it up and talk about, on a serious note, how Lawson's arc was no joke? I struggled with him in the beginning. I think I sent you a chat or a DM that you had to reassure me to keep going because, and then I wanted to hug him later when he made an offhand remark about, I think she said something about him being the worst, but still useful. And he's like, oh yeah, you could put that on my headstone. And I wanted to hug him. I felt so bad for him. Like, oh yeah, now I've turned the corner.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about his redemption arc and how readers reacted to some of the things he does and says.
Ooh, well, that has been interesting. I have had quite a few angry DMs from people on Instagram who are arc reading my book, who have been like, I hate him and I hate the toxic masculinity and I want to throw my Kindle across the room, and not in a good way. And then other people say they want to throw it, but in a good way. And so, yeah, I gave him a lot of work to do.
Mm-hmm.
This book is the third in a series that all takes place in the same town. So they're like loosely interconnected. And so I already knew this character a while ago because he's the brother of another character. And I already kind of had a feel for him and a feel for their family dynamic, which was very, really like super, football hero, gruff kind of country boy, father who just, is like, none of that eating tofu, none of that letting, women boss you around, find yourself a nice, quiet girl who lets you drive, that kind of stuff. And so I set it up pretty early on that Lawson defaults to that kind of behavior and that kind of shit. But right away from the second chapter, I have him questioning that and going like, oh boy, that was bad, because he knows better. But it's a long arc for him to stop doing those things. And Edith is so helpful because she is super bitchy, super prickly, and she calls him out on it. Like, she won't let him get away with anything. And so kind of through that, and also through my villain character, who is just like, he is a walking jar of toxic masculinity. Also Lawson seeing that and saying like, I don't want to be like that. Like, oh, I just saw a little bit of myself in that. And, so he has a lot of work to do. And by the end, if anybody starts reading it and they feel like they can't go on with this person, like, keep trying, because I promise he's so good by the end of the book. Nobody's perfect. I love flawed characters and I love flaws make people real. But yeah, there's a big arc for both of them. Also for Edith, because she also really notices how superior and how rude she is. And she is terrible to him sometimes, like genuinely terrible.
Yeah, her eye-opening moment, like how she recognizes that was also very fitting. Like I not to talk about somebody else's book on your interview, but it was not romance, and it was something else I was reading where I felt it questioned me as a mother to my children and my relationship with my mother. And when a book can do that, like when I was reading, your villain at his most slime ballness and having like, wondering if, oh my goodness, did Josie use a sensitivity reader for some of the things that he was saying? Like, but those moments that make me question, my relationships or the words I use, those are all good. Like that's growth.
Definitely. And I've had a lot of people say that because of the villain character, Kendrick, that they're like, I can't get through this because he says so many terrible things. And I feel like he says a lot of terrible things that need to be looked at, that need to have light shed on them, that need to be shown as something that only a really terrible person would say. So I don't sanitize that stuff. As far as like the workplace harassment stuff and all that, which I know is really upsetting for some people. But I think that the issue of toxic masculinity and Lawson's evolution to becoming a better person and seeing some of those really, really vile parts of the character of Kendrick is important. I don't want to just write like funny haha and super light. I think it's a rom-com, but it's not a beach read. And I don't mean to disparage that in a bad way at all, because I love books like that. I'm just saying, if you think it's just going to be all entirely like light and fun, you're going to have some angsty moments where you're like, well, shit, things just got really serious all of a sudden.
Yeah.
I can't help doing that because I want to explore those themes. I want to explore culture, especially like now. I feel like there's so much going on where we really need to look at ourselves and some of the things we say and some of the things we believe and some of the ways that we make other people feel. And so I'm okay with doing with creating characters that make people think about those things.
Awesome.
Even when it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, and that's the thing, even when it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So, is it uncomfortable to move into the editing phase, like when you are then having your work, critiqued by others and,
Mhm.
and getting feedback? Like, tell me some about your editing process. And I know I spoke earlier about how amazing chapter 1 is. I don't think you're going to answer my question with the way I expected about chapter 1, but other parts of the book and editing, and we'll come
Mhm.
back to chapter 1.
Yeah. Well, the book went through 7 edits. And I start out by, sending it out to some of my close friends on Critique Match, people that I've really developed good relationships with. And I when I send things out to people, I don't so much have super specific questions like, look at this and tell me what you think, because I'm always a little afraid that if I say that, it might bias the feedback
Right.
that I get a little bit by maybe putting too much emphasis on it.
Mhm.
I just have relationships with people who know that I absolutely am not touchy about criticism, and that I want them to be absolutely vicious. Like, I'm not here to have somebody say, "Oh, good job," and pat me on the back. Like, I want super fussy, nth degree, and brutal, angry stuff, so I know what's wrong. So yeah, so I guess the editing problem is a lot of hoping that people will tell me everything that they super hate, from larger themes and character details all the way down to the placement of commas, everything. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Damn those commas. So, when I had asked you, I think in one of my messages, about how much revision did it take to get chapter 1 to be such crackling perfection, I was blown away by your response. So share with everybody who's watching just what you have to say about chapter 1.
Yeah. So chapter 1, I did not do a ton of rewrites on it to make it into
Astounding.
what it is. It's almost exactly like the way that it was originally written. Of course, I always, still do editing with, changing the structure of sentences and making the wording better. And I did cut a lot down because Edith, I just let her talk a lot in the first version of the first chapter. And then I was like, okay, girlfriend, you are rambling. Like, we need to cut this down a little bit. We know you're a stream of consciousness talker, but cut it down a little bit. But for the most part, it came out just like that. It sprang fully formed from the head of Zeus, and it was what it is. And then I tidied it up a little bit. But I think I kind of wanted a little bit for it to have that, to feel a little raw or a little organic, because that's how a first meeting is. It's messy. You don't have structures in place for interacting with that person because they're a stranger. And so I think I wanted it to be a little, I wanted to leave it a little rough around the edges.
It's sharp. So a little bit, I guess, as we wrap up on the writing and editing portion, just tell me some of the challenges that you faced on this road to publication. It's not an easy path.
Yeah. It's I think the hardest thing is marketing.
Yeah.
For sure. It doesn't come naturally to me. And I wasn't super clever with social media. I didn't even have social media until like 8 months ago.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, like at all. So that part has been difficult, kind of having to put myself out there and talk to people. It's hard for me to do that thing of being, I'm not like Lawson with being able to be super cocky and just come out saying, well, I look good. I'm fabulous. That's hard for me to do it. And so I'm more like apologetic, like tapping on the shoulder saying, excuse me, if you don't mind, you could just maybe take a look at one chapter. If you hate it, it's totally fine to not read anymore. Like it's been hard to connect with people. That's been the hardest part, is the marketing, because I'm super shy about talking myself up, I guess. So
no, I think a lot of people feel that same way. And there's just this, it's how do you connect and say, I know, you'd love it if you give it a try, read this book. And then also, like, nobody ever wants to be pushy and be like, well, if you read it, leave a review.
Right? I'm like, please. A million emojis after your plea for a review. Like, please don't hate me.
My mom is a reader like I am, and I had to like teach her. I'm like, if you liked it, say something nice. It
Exactly.
doesn't matter what, just
Yeah.
leave a review.
Exactly. Yeah, I've had lots of people say, "Oh, I don't know what to say, I want it to sound good or something." I'm like, "Oh my God, the algorithm does not care, girlfriend, at all.
Right.
Like, just put some stars in there and you can say any word. I don't care what the word is. Like,
Yeah.
type in the word hermit crab. I don't care what you put in there. Just put in something so the robot overlords know that people are reading this book."
Yeah. I
So,
tried to get her to understand, you don't have to write a book report. Just
yeah,
share, like,
exactly.
what moved you to read it and to finish it, because so many, like, there are tons of, like, I'm not that person. I've never really abandoned a book that I start. I usually power through. There have been a
Mhm.
few over the years, but so if you manage to get to the end, then share what was worth
Yeah,
getting there.
definitely.
Yeah. All right. So tell us about the future. What are you working on now?
I am finishing up the last third of a novella, which I'm giving out as a freebie first to
I was
my
excited
newsletter
about this.
subscribers. Subscribe to my newsletter, people. I
Oh yeah, let
swear I
me tell
only
you when
send
you
it
get
once a month, only once a month.
that.
But yeah, I'm giving the entire novella, which will be about 150 pages total, to my subscribers first, and then I will put it up on Amazon later. So I'm finishing that. It's like an age gap rock star romance called New Tricks. And then after that, I'm working on a sports romance, which is a Formula One racing
Mm,
romance. And yeah, so that'll be the next thing after I finish New Tricks.
fantastic.
Yeah.
So you have to have heard this from more than me. Is Gigi going to get her own book?
I have asked that. Yes, people love the best friend character because she is so sassy and kind of terrible. And Gigi is definitely going to get her own something. At the very least, I will absolutely do a short story as bonus content for newsletter subscribers. But, like I've said, I just kind of follow what people are doing. Gigi is not shy about letting people know what she wants. She is super bossy. So if she's like, "Excuse me, bitch, this is going to be a novella or even a full-length novel," I'll be like, "All right, I'll follow you. We'll do this." I will do whatever she wants. But yes, she
I'm
will
glad
get
to
her
hear
own
that.
story. I already have ideas for what happens to her after this. So
Fantastic. So, do you have any wisdom for aspiring writers that want to follow in your footsteps?
oh, I mean, the first thing is I always just tell people, writers, read
Mhm.
everything. Don't just read in your genre. Read everything, because it gives you such expanded context. Um, and for that matter, don't wait to be a writer. Don't wait until you have something super cool to say, or until the muse is upon you, or until you have taken X number of master classes or whatever. Not that I'm like dissing that, because obviously that stuff is great, but it's like building a birdhouse and saying, like, I am not going to build a birdhouse until I have all of the very finest tools and I have them exactly organized. Like, just make a shitty birdhouse and then get tools and keep making more birdhouses until you make amazing ones. Like, keep doing it. So I guess my advice is write. And but my probably the biggest one is, once you start that process of doing writing, listen to criticism, all
Yeah.
criticism,
Yeah.
and do not be defensive about it, and don't be hurt because they haven't wounded your heart and soul by saying that. You're writing, hopefully for your readers,
Mhm.
and all information is useful, even when I hear stuff that is painful, or stuff that I totally disagree with, that I'm like, what? Like, were you looking at the same scene as I was? Like, that didn't happen. I still am like, but even if that isn't what happened, that's what they saw. And so that tells me that there's a flaw there. So listen to everything and don't get defensive,
Mhm.
I guess.
Yeah,
Mistakes make you better. Like, embrace mistakes. They absolutely will make you better, but only if you take them in, not if you reject them. So
exactly. And there is still that choice of like when you collect like feedback and you weigh like, okay, what am I hearing about the same thing from a lot of people? And you weigh that feedback and find the consensus and decide, even if it's just one person's, opinion, you decide whether or not, yeah, am I going to do something with this, or am I going to set that out aside as an outlier? Like there's,
Mhm.
be open to the feedback and see,
Yeah.
what you're getting, and it's your choice. It's the same thing when I send edits back in a manuscript. I fully expect, like, I'm always, is it going to be an accept or a reject? Yeah. So it's just, I think that's really good advice that you give, the read, the write, just do it, get the shitty first draft out there.
Yep.
So
Yep.
super important.
Yep. Just keep writing, keep reading, keep writing, and keep listening. So
Excellent. So I will, I'll be posting the kind of the Q&A just in verbal form, written form on my blog, so that people can see also the links of how to get to your newsletter, how to get to follow you, all that good stuff. We will, I don't know if you want me to send you a list of who logged in to join us, so you can pick a participant to send a first draft, or not first draft, a signed copy to.
punishment. I'm sending you my first draft.
Yeah. Oh, and I forgot, you were throwing in other swag too. Like, was it bookmarks from your cover artist?
Yes.
Oh, very nice.
There it is. All right. Yeah. So beautiful handmade bookmarks. These all have like
Awesome.
antique map paper, gold leaf, the vintage stamps. Every one of them is handmade, unique. They're so beautiful. My cover artist is brilliant. And so, yeah, I will be giving somebody a signed copy with a shitload of awesome bookmarks.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much for doing this interview, for talking with me today. I had such a great time, and I can't wait. I've already subscribed to your newsletter. I can't wait to read everything else you're putting out there.
Thank you so much. This was really, really fun.
Great. I'm glad. Well, have a great night and take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.